That means you want me to start talking, Rita? Are people here?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see attendees yet. I don't get to see attendees, I guess. No, I'm not. I'm a guest. Okay. I don't get to see attendees, I guess. No, I'm not. I'm a guest. Okay. I don't get to see attendees, I guess. No, I'm not. I'm a guest. Okay. I don't get to see attendees, I guess. No, I'm not. I'm a guest. Okay. I don't get to see attendees, I guess. No, I'm not. I'm a guest. Okay. Rita, that seems like a lot of feedback. Okay, now I have something's better. Okay, I believe it is time to begin. For all of you who are joining us, wherever you are, on behalf of Tasveer, welcome to this program. My name is Rick Simonson. I'm probably most usually identified with Elliott Bay Book Company here in Seattle, but Elliott Bay and myself are good friends and supporters and longtime partners in many ways with Tasveer. And today we are delighted to be helping celebrate the publication of Sonora Jha's remarkable book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, subtitle of which is Motherhood, Masculinity, and the Making of My Family. That's a book that came out just a few weeks ago and has really been drawing a great readership. And we, of course, in Seattle get to see it with her being here in Seattle, but also it's been mirrored elsewhere in the country. And in her today doing this program with Tasveer, she will be continuing in a series of conversations she's had with the book. And those have included doing so with people such as Ijeoma Oluo and Rebecca Solnit, and today Seattle's own Alka Kurian, who is also quite involved with Tasveer, as I'll say a little more in a minute. But Sonora's book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, is a memoir that has come out of life as it's been lived for her as a working journalist for many years, who then, including years of doing so in Singapore, and then coming to Seattle and making a new life, teaching at Seattle University, where she's a professor of journalism, and along the way, becoming a single mother and raising a son. And this book is about what that journey has been. And as some of us here in Seattle know the son question, we've gotten to witness it, and which makes reading this book even more sweet in a way, because you see her articulate the things that she's thought about, that her son's thought about, that are also things that are deeply embedded in many aspects of the culture both of the United States, and then for her as an immigrant coming into this country and seeing things here with a even keener and more alert eye. So today she will read from, I think she'll do some reading and talk about this with Alka Kurian. Alka, who is here, is a professor at the University of Washington, Bothell, and recently awarded a Fulbright award to go to Morocco, which will happen later this year. Alka is the author of Narratives of Gender Dissent in South Asian Cinemas and co-editor of New Feminisms in South Asia. And next year should see the publication of a new book, Transnational Fourth Wave Feminisms, a Post-Colonial Backlash, coming from Routledge, which is an esteemed academic publisher. Alka also has written fiction, we know, and is very involved. She co-directs the Tasveer South Asian Literary Festival and hosts a podcast for South Asian film and books. Back to Sonora, though, we're mentioning, and we're obviously celebrating this, not to be overlooked for her, since I'm talking about fiction, is Sonora's remarkable novel, Foreign, which is published and has done nicely in India, but it's a book that we do have here in Seattle at Elliott Bay, and it's a book that should be published here. And this is her first book, published a few years ago. It's a tremendous book, set mostly in India, but a little bit here as well. And it may come out depending on where all this conversation goes. We were in the little visiting we were doing just beforehand. We were talking about a lot of what horrifically is going on in India right now, but it's part of a lot of things that have not been going to the good there. So I will disappear here shortly, and you will be in the good hands of Sonora and Alka. We hope you'll put questions in the chat, and Alka, I think, will work those in. and Alka will actually close the program out at the end. So I think that is it for me to say, except that we are delighted to be doing this, and we're getting the instructions to our guests. And so you're going to now see Sonora and Alka. Please welcome Sonora Jha, Alka Kurian, with your best virtual attention and applause. Thank you both. Enjoy. Congratulations too.
Thank you so much, Rick, for your very generous introduction. In fact, I think this information kind of got lost in somewhere in the cyberspace, that the second book that I wrote, I co-edited, was with Sonora. So yes, of course. Right. Okay. So thanks a lot for your introduction, Rick. And thanks, Rita, for providing your support and for managing the Q&A. In this first ever collaboration between Tasveer and the South Asian Films and Book Podcast, I'm delighted to host our own Sonora Jha. Welcome to the show, Sonora.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here with you, Alka.
Likewise. Absolutely. So, as you know, I've been reading your book, and it's been quite an emotional journey for me. You know, the dust jacket of your book refers to it as a love story for feminists who hope to change the world one boy at a time. I would nuance this further and claim that it is also a love letter to your son, as well as to all our sons. All these days, as I was, and I mentioned this to you, all these days as I was living your life, you know, by reading your book, and as I followed the choices that you made or you didn't make or you couldn't make, I relived myself all the horrors as well as joys that I personally have been experiencing or had experienced as I raised my son as a single mother away from India in the West. And that was in the UK. I also imagined those traps that lay waiting not just for my son, but for all of us, immigrant women who've traveled across borders, whether these borders are geographical or political, emotional, sexual, in every which way. And as I held my breath over what's been, what is, and what lies in wait, your narrative took me along really an untraveled roadmap, telling me what we can do to save our boys, that it's okay to have slipped up because we can figure it out in so many ways. So Sonora, would you like to start by reading a short passage from your book?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alka. Thank you for this lovely introduction and for doing this. And it's such a delightful thing. I know you and I have had several conversations when we were co-editing the book and as friends. So I see it as, you know, two friends and two feminists having a conversation. So I hope that's the tenor that we will have today. So I'm going to read from this section called, this chapter 2. It's called, What If I'm Not a Good Feminist? But before I do that, I want to situate us also in the space that we are all in, especially those of us that belong to the South Asian diaspora, with the COVID numbers going up in India, and we're carrying the horror of that, the sadness of that, the anxiety of that, as we all know someone or the other that's either sick or has passed away in these past few days. And I couldn't help but think of the Kumbh Mela. We were talking about that just now earlier. And I want to go to, in this chapter 2, I'm 23 years old and I'm in that same place that was meant for the Kumbh Mela, which has now caused havoc with the crowding and COVID outbreak. So what if I'm not a good feminist? I'm 23 years old and I'm standing completely naked in front of a tap trickling water in the middle of a busy railway platform in broad daylight at Allahabad Junction. Yes, in the middle of the platform, not inside a ladies' restroom, but in an L-shaped concrete enclosure that is tall enough to hide my body, but not my face. People are milling about the railway platform in this second oldest city of India, where both Hindu gods and Mughal emperors have left their patriarchal seeds. And if I can dare to lift my eyes from the water trickling down at my feet, I will look into the faces of men who have stopped to stare fixedly at my face as I try to collect enough water in a plastic mug to wash myself down. I am trying not to think of how easily any one of these men could step into the zig and then the zag of this enclosure I am in and see me naked. I have chosen to take the risk because my skin has been baking under the 106-degree Allahabad sun, and I have not showered in 2 days. My clothes, covering me from neck to ankle and designed to give me the highest degree of modesty, are close to giving me a heat stroke instead. So my 23-year-old girl brain has chosen to let me take off all my clothes and run cold water down my body as I fight back hot tears. What am I doing here? Years later, I would learn that these taps of water and these bathing areas were provided as facilities for the 120 million or so ascetic sadhus who arrived at Allahabad Junction, mendicants congregating at the Kumbh Mela, the largest pilgrimage known to humankind, religious men with their hair and dreads as long and knotted as tree trunks, their bodies thin and naked, but for sacred ash, and their minds afloat under the influence of gods and ganja, where they washed their feet to rid themselves of the mud settled between the toes from miles of devout procession. I am now washing the soot and dust and layers of dried, rancid sweat from hours of listless railway travel. These showers on the railway platform were meant for men. Almost all public spaces in India are meant for men.
Thank you so much, Sonora. It's as you were reading it, I was literally visualizing where exactly those words are on that page, because that particular section that you read is really very powerful. And I was also thinking while you were reading that when you wrote this passage and when you actually experienced this experience, little did you know that this Kumbh Mela was going to become a super spreader in today's very dangerous times of COVID. So, and also I think we are also sitting at very interesting crossroads where, these earth-shattering events and, have happened. We've had, George Floyd's trial that's come to a very satisfactory conclusion, and where we are sort of once again sort of coming together to really talk about what does it mean to be a non-white man in the Western world. So there have been several books and articles on, that have been written by a lot of people on raising children with progressive values. You have books like, articles and books like, such as those by Chinamanda Adichie, How to Raise a Feminist Daughter, Alison Vale, How to Raise a Feminist, Emma McCroy's kids' book about feminism, and my dear friend Fazia Afzal Khan, who read a book 35 years ago, and she can't recall the name of the author, and she so regrets not having bought the book, and that book has disappeared. And the book was titled 35 years ago, How to Raise a Feminist Daughter. And there are other such books. There's also a book by Mike Adamnick called Raising Empowered Daughters, a Dad to Dad Guide. So clearly, most of these books and articles deal with raising children or girls as feminists. But in this very crowded field, your book, in my opinion, is the first intervention on how one must raise feminist boys. How did it come about?
How did the book come about, or how did the feminist boy come about? I guess both, right?
Yes. But talk about the origin of the idea of this book.
Yeah. So, I was raising a feminist boy the way you kind of have like this feminist lens or a feminist outlook. When I had my baby, I was so terrified that he would grow up to be like the men that I had grown up around, violent men, men with insecure egos and fragile egos, that I realized I needed him to be a feminist and to see a woman's place in the world, to uphold the full humanity of women. And so just placing that at the back of my mind, I had this desire to raise him as a feminist, and for having the advantages of feminism for a boy to come to my boy, right? And we can get into that in a bit. But I was already doing that But I hadn't thought of it as a book, right? I thought of it as my life's practice and just a value system that I was living by, and the choices I was making, the feminist choices I was making in order for that to come about. But when I started to write a memoir after I wrote my first novel, I was trying to figure out, what is it going to be about? It was definitely a mother-son memoir, and I was sort of struggling with the themes and coming upon one theme or the other. But there were all these things happening in society that I started to respond to in political essays that would get published around, say, the Aziz Ansari episode during Me Too, and then, campus rapes, things that happened to people of color, and Black Lives Matter, and the intersections with feminism. So I would write those, and also, the terrible, just on the day before my 50th birthday 3 years ago, the Katwa rape, and the little girl who was gang raped and killed. And I wrote an essay about enablers, and these essays were getting huge responses and were going viral, and people were writing to me from across the world, and across skin color and gender. And it would take me by surprise, and also be sort of felt like this call to do more of that, to respond to this hunger for conversation. And a lot of South Asian women in particular would say, thank you for saying these difficult things, because I can't say it. My family will be shamed, or etc. Right? So I realized, okay, because I keep setting the memoir aside and responding to this moment, and I write that with an urgency, and you know what it's like when you are writing with an urgency, that this needs to be out there, at least it needs to be out of me. I realized, okay, that's what my memoir has to be, because that's what I am writing best, and that is what people are hungry for as well. And so then it became this sort of a solidified idea, and then just sort of poured out of me.
Mm-hmm. That's really excellent. And, I think what I got from your book is a very interesting insight into the ways in which there is a lot of women. There's a lot of people who are determined to raise their children, and in particular their sons, as feminists. There are single women, and they're gay and heterosexual couples, they're queer and trans identified people, coming from a wide variety of race and class and gendered and ethnic and national backgrounds. But then we also know about a majority of people, a majority of women in particular, who are not planning on dislodging a majoritarian patriarchy, and they're not going to do it in a hurry, because they don't see any value in going against the grain. And in fact, they seem to want to protect it. In particular, I'm reminded of Phyllis Schlafly, who was a leading conservative lawyer and political activist, and founded, in fact, Stop the Equal Rights Amendment campaign in 1970s. So what would you say to people like her?
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's going to be on board with this kind of a thing, right? As Ijoma Oluwa was saying at the book launch, there's a market for this kind of book, and there's a market for this kind of an idea or this kind of ideology, right? But I think one of the reasons they're not interested in dislodging patriarchy, and first I should say that it's not just women's work, right? And we know this. It's not just women's work. It's not, my book is not one more thing for women to do, for mothers to do. Now, you've cooked for the whole family, now raise a feminist son. That's the next thing on your to-do list, right? I do have to-do lists in there, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that this has to be a societal, it has to be done by a feminist village, right? Which includes everyone. And fathers as well, right? But the reason people are not going to be part of this is because we haven't seen enough examples of a joyful feminist life, right? Sarah Ahmed calls the feminist at the dinner table, who's always pointing out the issues, the feminist killjoy, and she says, embrace that identity. I totally embrace it. I can totally be the feminist killjoy. But we don't have enough examples of a joyful feminist life, of a powerful feminist life, that if you've made feminist choices, you haven't ended up in the dirt somewhere. You haven't ended up broken and bruised and forgotten, right? So if we have enough examples of that, if we have examples of women especially living on their own terms, right? LGBTQ people living on their own terms, enjoying life, on their own terms, having lived a feminist existence and raised feminist kids, then that becomes part of an aspiration, that becomes a desire. And I had some of those role models, and I would look at their lives and wonder and say, how can I have that? And so when you start to be attracted to that way of living and that way of joy, or that path toward joy, then you start to question why you are limiting yourself or your kids from having that. So all these things have to come together. And that's why I see that those of us that have a voice and have a publisher and have the ability to do this kind of writing, we must, we must. So I think these are very difficult systems to dislodge. We don't love women yet as a society. We cannot have that unconditional love that women deserve. And people like Phyllis Schlafly, I saw the show. I haven't read anything about her, and I know that the show was problematic in many ways, but you do see her also having self-doubt and saying, I'm buying into this and I'm selling this idea of a conservative woman's life is at home. But she's straining towards something as well, where she's being put down and realizing that maybe this is not such a great idea. Maybe I bought into something that's problematic. I challenge any woman to say that she's living her most joyful existence within patriarchy.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, I too watched that program, and the very last scene where she had, she's aspiring, she's expecting to have been selected for this particular position that she'd been fighting for. And when she doesn't get it, you see that sadness, that overwhelming sadness on her face. And that's where the camera, focuses and freezes.
Yes.
And in fact, I was reminded of an interview that I watched of Nawal al-Saadawi, where she's talking about, we must all lead this feminist revolution. And the interviewer, this is a BBC interview, and the interviewer asks her, but what if it doesn't work out? She says, I have hope that it will work out. The history will tell us that it will work out. And she says, think about the ways and think about the lives of women 100 years ago. We are much better off today. So there is hope, right?
Yeah. And look at us, look at how far we've come even, look at the Me Too movement, for instance. Who thought that we could actually say, yes, this happened to me, and that we could name our perpetrators? And here we are. And that also ties into something that I wanted to say about that if enough of us are doing it, then that becomes the norm, right? It becomes normalized that we can talk about our rape. It becomes normalized we can talk about our abortions, that these are not things filled with shame. And Bhamari Devi, who was, raped in India, gang raped, a lower caste woman by upper caste men, she said this, right? She said, the shame is not mine, the shame is theirs. Why should I be ashamed? If if a lower caste woman, and Dalit women have been telling us for the longest time that this is happening, it's not Jyoti Singh that should have given us a wake-up call or woken us up. But if they've been saying it with so much to lose and so much at stake, then the rest of us really need to do it too, and normalize it and say, this is a problem, and there's a lot of hope for sure. We can all march together and sing and dance together toward this more equitable way of living.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you think about the ways in which there is so much, I think we're either hearing about it more because it's being reported more, or the instances of rapes and sexual violence and sexual harassment have actually increased. And that's because it's an expression of the anxiety, the patriarchal anxiety that is, very worried about losing its privilege. So it's like there's a massive backlash. And the more intense the backlash that we see, the more intense the fight is, because women have been speaking out, so you're very right in pointing out that, there was a wake-up call in 2012 with the gang rape and murder of Jyoti Singh. But that was probably because she came from a very different social milieu. Mm-hmm. And because Battle was launched, in fact, sort of dates back to even further. And Bhamari Devi's incident that, it happened in 1992. So yeah, absolutely. I'll ask you a question, which I will ask at the risk of sounding completely counterintuitive to my work, but I'll ask this question because the word feminism is a loaded word, right? I was giving a talk at Ashoka University, and they asked the same question about, why feminism, right? So I'll ask you this question, because it is a loaded term. A lot of people are uncomfortable using this term. including some very progressive scholars, and you talk about Roxane Gay, who's uncomfortable with it. So why use the word feminist? Why not say that, we commit ourselves to raising our sons in an atmosphere of love and respect and dignity and equality and care and everything, which a lot of us do in any case. So that when our sons grow up, in this background, they emulate the values on growing up. So we'll have met our goal in any case. So why feminism?
No, you won't meet your goal with that. In the same way that you won't meet your goal if you say all lives matter. Right? You have to say Black Lives Matter because you're turning a specific focus on a particular problem, on a particular inequity, right? So if you're just raising a kind and gentle person, you're telling your boy he will think that opening the door for a woman and maybe buying her dinner, paying for her dinner is a gentleman, right? That's what we say. Oh, he's a gentleman. He's, maybe cooking occasionally and saying, oh, honey, just sit down. Don't worry. Today I will cook. Today I will babysit my children, right? Those are the strides. And to be sure, like with my first husband, when I divorced him, people were like, oh my God, but he's so wonderful. He cooks, he takes care of the kid. And, as if those are the markers of feminism. He was a very gentle, the two husbands I've had are really gentle, non-violent, wonderful men. And so it was very hard to convince the world, and the world was probably convinced I was the problem, right? But that's not what we're seeking. We're not just seeking gentle, sweet, respectable, and respectful men. We are seeking warriors in the cause for dismantling structures that privilege them, whether they want it or not, right? Those privileges are already in place. So whether we're talking about white male supremacy or white male patriarchy in the US, or we're talking about Brahminical patriarchy in India, these are systems where even the sweetest men are privileged and they don't even know it. So feminism is a practice and a way of teaching them and showing them, hey, look, why do you get this and not the other girl in your class or LGBTQ people? Why is she being teased? Why is she being told don't dress this way and you get to go out at night or and be as late as you want? Why do you have these? Wouldn't it feel more equitable to you if you earned these privileges the way she has to earn them? That you have to work as hard as she has to in order to convince people that she's smart, right? So to dismantle those privileges, to fight for the equity. Now my son is a software engineer, and I've said, hey, what about this bro culture or bro grammar or whatever culture in tech, right? What do you do about that? And so I want him to be aware of that. I want him to know how much sexual assault is a constant danger for the women friends that he has. Like that it's something that they always have to be aware of. Feminism will teach him that. Feminism will make him clue him into those things and have him break down those structures. So I don't want just a sweet, gentle, respectable person. Although, where Roxane Gay is coming from is this notion, the word feminism has been so loaded because in the US especially, it's been white women's feminism, which has precluded people of color and the particular concerns of people of color. And so when feminism is defined in those narrow ways, then you have to sort of question, like, okay, is this for me, right? Is this kind of feminism for me? But with Kimberly Crenshaw coming in and saying feminism has to be intersectional or it's not feminism at all, that is the kind of feminism that I embrace and you embrace, and we want everyone, including white feminists, to embrace. And then that becomes this expansive way of being a feminist. And that's what we want to teach our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I never used the expression, I didn't think that when I was raising my son, when I was in England. So I've lived in two separate Western spaces. So that was that experience. So when I was raising him, I didn't sort of intentionally use the lens of feminism because I don't think I had that, my consciousness hadn't evolved. I think like we're always sort of growing and we're learning and we're reading and we're thinking and we are responding to the situation and the things that are happening in the world and to ourselves. So reading your book made me believe that I raised my son all right as a single mother in the UK, where Addie was born. I didn't think I was looking at it from a feminist angle, but I filled his mind with intellectual curiosity. I read stories to him. I read the Guardian op-eds to him when he was 6 years old. And he would say, Mom, I love all this information and knowledge going to my head. The little baby, like in the nook of my arm,
That's
on the
adorable.
bed. Huh?
I said, that's adorable. That picture is adorable. And
I
yeah,
know,
yeah.
I know, yeah. And you also talk about that. And I openly talked to him about his body. So that he had the confidence to discuss anything with me about, little, when he was little, and he would talk about he having a crush on someone, how his heart had broken because Emma didn't look back at him. I took him to to stop the war, protest marches, while I knew that he was developing his own personality and saying like, why is my mom dragging me with her everywhere? But at the same time, I didn't think about preparing him for any top schools or top careers. I indulged his passion for music and would have been perfectly happy if he had chosen that career. But it was only when I came to the United States. So, I was talking about transgressing and, traversing various borders. It was only when I came here and when I met the model minority moms that I felt that I'd done it all wrong. For schools, for prep schools. I hadn't saved any money for his expensive colleges, didn't think about Ivy League universities. I never thought about that. And I had this really interesting and very uncomfortable experience once. This is when I was living in Sammamish. One of my very good friends, she's absolutely no nonsense feminist woman. And she said, she called me one day and she said, hey, she'd seen Addie smoking in a park along with some of his friends where they were playing the guitar. And Addie, I think, must have been like 17, going on 18. And the way she said it, I recall my stomach falling. Her words felt like, someone rapping my knuckles. I knew that he'd been experimenting with cigarettes. I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't a fool. I knew what was going on. But I said, oh my God, I'm sorry. I had no idea. So I lied to her. And I said, well, thank you so much for letting me know. And my, Shesh, my husband, who's a strong man, who throws caution to the air, he was also feeling at a loss. Now, when I read that sentence in your novel, in your memoir, where you tell your son that if he if he and his friends were drinking and needed a ride, you would be there, no questions asked. And you also borrow from Audre Lorde to make the claim that mainstream white women's feminism may not be adequate for your son. Given the above example that I've given you from our own life, what do you make of the mainstream brown women's feminism in India and the diaspora? Will it rescue our sons?
No, because it's if we have chosen to be marginalized in any way, to be other or choose a different path in any way, right? That you and I have. We are divorced women. We both had 2 marriages. You are still in your second marriage, and will always be. And I am, and I'm twice divorced, right? We've experienced a different path of life, right? That has already attracted disapproval. And that's already attracted scrutiny from a sort of mainstream way of being. Now, when you say brown feminists in India, in India or of the Indian diaspora or South Asian diaspora, that itself is so varied, right? So we can't say it's of any one kind. There are many people who have similar experiences from ours, or different experiences of being othered. One thing is for sure, that the kind of feminism that is tied very intrinsically with capitalism, which is about women achieving, right? Women sort of living the dream of the capitalist life, or the advanced career, and the kids going to great colleges, and where feminist kids, or feminism and the success of their kids become sort of like a badge of having had it all. Like, we have it all because I have my career, I have my kid, I have my husband, I have this grand home, and I look fresh and amazing, right? That brand of feminism can be very problematic and can be a trap, right? So that is not something to aspire to. So yes, your son was drinking, your son was smoking, my son might be drinking, and I will fight for him. And this is something I know it's kind of roundabout, I'll get to the point, but This is something that I remember saying to my cousins as well, that no matter what happens, be on the side of your child, right? Unless, of course, they're doing terrible things in the world, right? Be on the side of your child. Do not buy into this thing of log kya kahenge, what will people say? Because that is what undid us. And if I buy into that, whether that seems like the feminist capitalist dream or not, that's problematic. Now, coming to feminism, the kind of feminism that we see in India, which parallels some of the worst aspects of white feminism. And I have lovely white feminist friends, and we're not saying everyone, right? We're saying the kind of feminism that disempowers others or does not bring everyone along. We see that with Savarna feminism or upper caste feminism in India, which is not including and not passing the mic to Dalit feminists, which is not making way for Dalit feminists, and is not responding to the concerns that are very particular to Dalit feminists and to Dalit men, feminist women and men and people across gender. That is very problematic, and it sort of reflects the Western white feminism. That's not meant for my son either. That's not going to, even though he may have certain privileges from my being in a Brahmin family, I would find that very problematic, and he would not embrace it, and they would find ways to other us as well. So anything that feels like that's coming from a white supremacist patriarchal culture or a Brahmin patriarchal culture is going to let our boys down no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sort of talking about, the significance of the centrality, or the importance of paying attention and being vigilant to intersectionality, because feminism is not a monolith. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience. Rashmi Kaushik would like to ask the following question. And she says, is awareness enough? What should men who are privileged in patriarchy do to dismantle the system that gives them this advantage? And yeah, so do you want to respond to this question? What can men do to dismantle patriarchy?
Awareness is not enough unless it's leading to action, right? So there's awareness and there's a constant re-awareness, right? Constantly examining, constantly questioning, not resting on any one form and saying, okay, my job is done, right? So what are some things that male feminists can do? Well, one thing is, we're talking about both individual as well as structural and societal change, right? So at the individual level, of course, they can be equal partners, equal parents, equal students, being aware of the way of women's conditions, of the women around them. Listen, be quiet, don't interrupt in meetings, for instance. Those are little pieces of action that you can take. Listen to women's stories and believe them. There's a lot, and women have to do that as well, but believe other women. But men especially, to listen to women's stories, believe them, ask, what can I do to be in solidarity with you? What can I do to be in support of you? Also look at your organizations that you work in, look at the leadership and see whether there are women and LGBTQ people and people of color, BIPOC people in positions of power. And if not, then question that. Your work is not done, because unless you have that, you are not a feminist entirely, and that you're still on the path, right? So there's a whole lot of these actions that you can take on an individual and societal and structural level, and then constantly question yourself too. One of the things that I keep thinking we have to teach men is to learn to make mistakes and know that you're going to make mistakes, to fall down in this path of feminism, and learn to apologize and say, I messed up and I'm going to try to do better. I mean, I appreciate that when someone does that and they say, I was trying, I realize I'm not there yet, I messed up. And we have to, all of us have to do that, right? In our path toward being anti-racist or feminist, etc. So there's a whole lot. And give whoever you might be talking about, gift them my book with my love.
In fact, Anita Kerker says that she bought this book, I bought this book, although I'm a mother of 2 girls. Yeah, okay. Very good. So you don't have to be mother of sons to buy this book. Yeah, because, I think this is relevant for everyone. Because your girls, I don't want to be speaking on your behalf, but I'll let you say, but I just think that if you buy a book for your daughter, she'll probably give it to her boyfriend. So after reading this, I look forward to sharing with them the qualities that they must look for in their friendships and future partners. But yeah, that's
Bingo.
right.
Bingo. That's exactly when I say, that parents of girls, because I want girls and women to know what to expect and what to demand from their relationships with men around them, not just partners, but everyone, even at work. Yeah. Thank you, Anita.
Yeah. In fact, I went through depression. I felt reading your book was like psychotherapy. I went through, everything. I was reminded of everything that I did right, I did wrong. And I said, oh my God, I felt depressed, but then I felt elevated, and I'll come to that. But talking about boys, there's a lot of peer pressure on our sons from the mainstream Western culture that is steeped in, we've talked about this, in anti-intellectualism, machismo and misogyny and racism and bullying. Now, if we raise our sons as feminists and anti-racist, telling them to go against the grain, that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to cry, yeah, it's okay to make a mistake and own up. If we do that to our boys, how will they resist this peer pressure on the schoolyard and on the college campus, and when they go into the professional world?
So we assume that they are going to meet very different people that are very different from them. However, the world is changing. And what if your son and my son and Anita's daughters and our friends' kids and all extending outward, what if they are all raised with these values and they're not fighting on the schoolyard? So let me tell you this. My son has not had a single fight on the school, like a fist fight. He hasn't been on a single one in the schoolyard. He's grown up in Seattle. He's gone to public school as well as private school. He has never had that kind of experience, which we think, oh, that's bound to happen. So don't name your child this, or don't let him wear this, or don't let, and of course, there's a lot of bullying, and there's, he's a cisgender heterosexual male. So he's probably avoided the kind of bullying and battering that happens to LGBTQ kids and etc. But if it's not happened within his circle, then it's possible that those circles extend outward, right? So I do think that we are seeing a gentler masculinity emerge in the next generation and the generation even younger than that. And we are still, we're still looking at it from the lenses that we've been given. And yes, of course, if that happens, then they have to call it out as an aberration and say, and hopefully there'll be enough friends that will say, dude, what the hell are you doing? You can't beat my friend. That's wrong. That's misogynistic. That's homophobic. That's, all these things. And that schools have also been taught to catch that kind of behavior and not dismiss it as boys will be boys, right? So when we say this, we, in a way, are falling back on that idea that boys will be boys. I expect that when I send my kid anywhere, that my child will not encounter that kind of thing. Now, when they do encounter that, that is where we have to change those systems, right? We have to make sure we're changing those systems where there's violence and where there's homophobia. And that's why intersectionality has to be important, right? Like if Dalit men are being subjected to violence, and say this, the story of Emmett Till in the US, right? That a white woman can still totally bring a harm to my child as a brown-skinned man, as a black kid can be murdered. There's that power that a woman can have over a man that's at a lesser stature than her. So in that case, what does feminism mean? Which is why feminism has to be intersectional and has to be fighting against casteism, against racism, against homophobia, because otherwise our boys who are embracing feminism are not going to be safe. And if they're not safe, then they're not doing the work of safety of women around them either.
Mm-hmm. And so in addition to the peer pressure that our boys and our girls, go through, their lives are also very much controlled by the media, social media, video games, etc., which lead terrible social and psychological, which have consequences, social and psychological consequences. and you claim that instead of living in denial of the media, because we can't forbid our children from accessing that because it is impossible, given how pervasive it's become. So instead of living in denial of forbidding our children from accessing the media, there is a way to make the media work for our children. How do you say that?
Yeah, and I discussed this concept of co-viewing, right?
Yeah.
Which a lot of scholars have talked about and researched, where right from when they're kids, we're watching films with them, we're watching television with them, we're playing video games with them, or at least occasionally dropping in and saying, hey, let's find out what you're doing, and maybe talking around that. And then even asking, like, without judgment, saying, so what sites were you on? Like, what did you find out? What's going on in the world? Tell me about it, right? Trying to kind of just give them this sense of this value system, like, okay, these are the values I have, and hopefully you will take these further into your social media world, which is where you hang out most of the time. And look at, in the pandemic, we are definitely, kids are online and on using screens upon screens upon screens, and we aren't vigilant. We can't be, right? It's not like the playground where you can see the 3 kids that your kid is playing with. Now the world could be in your, just like a few steps away from you, and you don't even know who your kid is hanging out with or what sites they're on. So sort of just keeping a dialogue around and bringing those media into your world and scrutinizing them, and sort of like, embracing them for the fun they provide, but also, looking at a game like Grand Theft Auto and saying, oh my goodness, what is going on? So that your kid knows, and especially your boy would know, like, oh yeah, this is definitely problematic. I'm playing this. I'm going to make the best choices I can, and then sort of like get it out of their systems. And this is not easy, and not everyone is going to have the same results or say, oh, everything worked out fine. It's definitely a quagmire, right? Like, but to the extent that we can do things, we can co-view with them and keep the conversation open.
Yeah, and also, as you mentioned, start as young as possible. And I was fascinated by the ways in which you place so much emphasis on storytelling. As you were raising your son, you read stories to him, and sometimes you'd invent stories, give different endings. That was really fascinating, because it reminded me of how there was, when Addie was little, I was reading this book to him where you had to guess what happened next. So you had, on one page, you had the king and queen. They were probably counting his money. And then the next page, they're sitting, there's in some kind of a balcony, and there was a speech bubble that says, what are they doing? So Addie said, they're probably reading The Guardian. And I laughed. So it's interesting to see the ways in which he was connecting his own reality with their reality. And he was, de-exoticizing them, right? Normalizing critical reflection as something normal. Or when you say that, you would say, oh my God, where are these feminist fairy tales? So start as young as possible. And there is, my ex-husband, he tried his level best to toughen up Addie. Now, Addie's a very sensitive young boy. And he made him play the most aggressive football and the most aggressive tennis. And Addie used to have these horrendous pains all over his body. I took him to the doctor so many times, and it was terrible for me to see him suffering so much. And very quickly after my divorce, Addie just dropped those games. And I once went to pick him up from school and saw him sitting at the edge of the schoolyard playing with grass. He was just messing around with soil and grass, along with his friend Justin. And all the other kids were being very rough and rowdy and all. And I was a little disappointed seeing him being so placid. And I'm trying to make sense of my disappointment in terms of the toxic masculinity that I might have inadvertently become victim to. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, we are all in patriarchy, right? Like, we've been used, women are the foot soldiers of patriarchy. We've often been deployed into going and policing other women and policing our boys, I felt that, and I say that in the book, right? I would feel shame when my boy cried on the playground, and even my most feminist instincts would not, get rid of that shame. I would feel like, oh God, I wish he wouldn't do this. Other boys are laughing at him, or other parents are, maybe saying this or that, which is the same feeling you had, right? Like when the woman corrected you about the smoking, or it was the smoking, yeah.
Yeah.
So we do exist in this reality, and so we can't it's hard to sort of live outside of that and entirely be these perfect feminist machines that allow that get our children to have these joyful lives and things. So we have to forgive ourselves at that point and say, okay, I understand that, I'm going to feel this way. And, I write about this instance where I was encouraging my son, not encouraging, but I was sort of teasing him, and we'd gone to dinner, and there was a woman that served, the server, he asked her a question, and she responded, and when she left, I said, oh, were you flirting with her? You're 18 now, you can flirt. And he said, no, she's at work, she's a woman at work, and if I start flirting with her, and women servers or waitresses get hit on a lot by their customers, and it's a real problem, and they're required to keep smiling, and it would be gross of me if I were doing that when she's at work. And I realized, oh my goodness, look at me. I was sort of doing this weird teasing thing, and I'm a feminist, and I, and now I'm learning from him that, yeah, you can't, that's bad feminism, right? So I think we have been raised in this thing, in this sort of patriarchy. We will not recognize it all the time, and we will, our knee-jerk ways of being will kick in. But as long as we scrutinize it and then not repeat it or keep on learning, that's part of it, right? Like it's a practice, it's not perfection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a couple more questions. There's a question from Archana Verma who asks, can you please give a sample of a non-feminism aware comment that you've heard from privileged and or successful women? And how do you respond to that tone deafness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes in, so much of a judgment of other women, for instance, right? Like where we're constantly judging other women and their lives and their choices, where we may think, I mean, I face that a lot. I'm sure you have too, Alka, right? That it's not that so-called feminist women who embrace a certain kind of feminism may think that our choices have not been that great, right? Like, oh, I've had women say to me, that they'd like to advise me on how to find my third husband, or things like that. And they may be women who have never taken a risk in their life, And I feel like, no, I would much rather take risks and make more mistakes and maybe end up with 6 divorces than play it safe, or play it safe and appease someone, or sort of like say, oh, men do this, and so it's fine, and not to expect any better, right? So perfectly wonderful feminists are capable of saying those kinds of things. Now, I understand, because we were just talking about the mistakes we ourselves make as feminists, right? The way we trip up, that because we do that, I have come to find compassion and understand that, okay, there's going to be things like that. And I also have come to a point where I'm not affected that much by it. Earlier, these things would hurt me, and I would, be confused, and it was the sound of patriarchy that I'd grown up with. So I would feel a sense of lack even. I would feel like, yes, there must be something lacking in me, that, very, very briefly, I would feel that there was, and that's why I keep walking away from men, and what is wrong with me, etc. Right. But So yes, there are statements like that, and and feminists saying, oh, maybe she should not look glamorous, not just with me, but other people, right? Like, oh, maybe she should wear wear her hair a certain way to seem more serious, or she shouldn't be this way because she wouldn't come across as intellectual enough. That you get that in academia, right? And I just call bullshit on that. And I feel like, come on, man, this is not what we fought for. Put on your fucking red lipstick, put on your short skirt, go do your thing, because you don't have anything to prove to anyone. And it's been hard, right? Because when I was a young journalist, I dressed down. I would be like totally de-glamorized and not even wear kajal in my eyes, and I would wear these baggy shirts and baggy pants and totally desexualize, de-glamorize myself. Why? So there are those feminists who feel like, oh, you're not serious enough if you're not, dressing down, or if you're not trying to look intellectual. So, I mean, I just say that it takes all kinds, and they're making mistakes just like we're making mistakes. Ignore them, bring yourself to a place where those things stop hurting. And then don't pass it on to other, I would never pass that on to the next generation of academics coming in to work.
You should actually, thank you so much for that, that comment on the appearance of a feminist woman, the ideal feminist woman. You should actually check out the women that we see, the feminists and scholars, some of the greatest scholars that you see at the NWSA, the National Women's Studies Association conference. My God, they've got the clothes and the hair and the jhumkas and the makeup. It's just lovely.
Yeah.
So that look has definitely changed. So going back to misogyny, I was struck by, and I'm very conscious of time, so we'll probably have to hurry up. I was struck by your comment that it's misogyny that drives boys to be beaten and raped. It just sounds counterintuitive, right? And that it's misogyny that drives boys to be beaten and raped.
Misogyny from the point of the perpetrator, not misogyny.
Yeah. Oh, of course, yes. And that you also make a link between white misogyny and terrorism and mass violence. White misogyny, domestic violence, terrorism, and mass violence. Yeah. So if you can give me a quick response to that.
Yeah, because misogyny is basically a hatred for women, right? And a hatred for what is considered feminine. So if you're going to hate women or fear them or think of them as less than, then anything that reminds you of that, right? Like homophobia is the brother of misogyny, right? Anything that is a reminder of weakness or vulnerability or less than, whether it's in a very physical manifestation as the sissy boy, or for the words that we use for gay men or gay boys, you're going to hate that, right? Because the association is with something that is less than. So you are going to want to lash out against that, right? Or if someone calls you that, you're going to bristle against that. If someone says, something to you and you think of yourself as this very macho man, your ego is going to be hurt because the association with a feminine form seems like a slur on your manhood, which is why when people say, oh, you're a pussy, right? You're basically talking about female genitalia, and you're sort of degrading it and saying it's something that's a problem, or a feminine way of being is a problem. And so it's a slur. So, a man should be able to say, yeah, thank you for calling me a pussy. I am in touch with my vulnerability, and I am able to cry, and I am able to be incredibly, happy and joyous, right? So if you have misogyny, all these things will be sort of a domino effect, right? If you hate women, you're going to hate the things that remind you of them, or the things that feel like abusive because someone says you're like a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Does that clarify?
It does. And very quickly on, what's the link between misogyny, domestic violence, and
right,
terrorism and violence?
Right. So let's say let's take Derek Chauvin, for instance, right? the statistics in the US with policemen is that they are 15 times more likely to be abusive to their wives and their children than the general population. 15 times. So either these are violent men being attracted into policing, or the act of policing other people is making them violent, right? Whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. But think of the misogyny in the police force. Now, those are the policemen that are going out and trying to deal with a situation like Makia running with a knife or whatever they say she was doing, right? Those are the policemen that are going out and taking this large man down, right? George Floyd, that could turn around and snap your neck, but you have a gun, right? And so you can murder him in front of the world, and no one can come and stop you, right? That is the kind of white supremacist violence, Brahminical violence that has, because you know that the cops are on your side, right? In India, for instance, Brahmins know that the system is set up to protect them, so they can rape lower caste women, they can rape Dalit women, they can beat Dalit men, they can beat everyone, downward, including their own wives, and their wives will be quiet about it and not tell anyone, therefore perpetrating it downward, right? So that kind of terrorism, that kind of horrific impact that we see, all of it is rooted in misogyny, right? Or misogyny sort of helps them perfect it, because they can, they can try out violence on women and children in the home, and then extend their way outward. A lot of the mass shooters, when they look into their background, they see that they had a trail of violence against women, and women had been calling the police a long time on these men and saying, hey, this is a dangerous man, but we didn't listen, because we said, oh, okay, this was just like a domestic thing, and until they take a gun and they shoot tons of people. So we see examples of that kind of thing all the time. And yeah, I mean, and then there's the military, which my father was in the military, but that's also state perpetrated violence, and it leads to PTSD and more violence when they come back home.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was about to comment, I was about to say that so family, which is the site of violence, then becomes a training ground,
yeah,
for inherently violent people, or people who become violent, as a result of being and seeing violence around them, their other men role modeling violence for them. I'd like to quickly go to questions, and we have a ton. Rita wants to know, is there a moment in life when you thought that you felt you've done your job, or is this an ongoing job to raise a feminist son?
It's an ongoing job. It's an ongoing job. I will say that without a blink of an eye, without whatever it is, blinking my eye, because I've said this before, that I feel like my son mansplains, and now he's become more and more conscious of it. And, I can say that to him and he'll be like, oh my God, no, I didn't, protest, because he knows mansplaining is a problem, right? But, there are, all the time, there are ways of seeing that he still has to learn and I still have to learn. So then, at a certain point, the joy is that when you say you're raising a feminist son, that the focus shifts from raising to feminist son, that he's already a feminist son now, right? And so how do I raise him, or how do I stay in relationship with a feminist son, right? And because feminism is never perfect, my feminism, your feminism, his feminism, why would I expect my son to have finally arrived, or that my work is finally done? It's never done. Feminism itself is changing. Now we are enthusiastically, at least we should be, embracing trans feminism, which, a lot of women are not, but they should. And a few years ago, that was not something that we were doing, right? And we're not seeing the causes of and there's intersectional feminism. So feminism is growing and it's becoming stronger and better. And so the work never ends. We have to keep developing it.
Right, absolutely. So I wanted to sort of, since you talk about intersectional feminism and how feminism is evolving, it's a dynamic field. So just going back a little bit, backtracking to men, and in particular marginalized masculinities. I know we've determined that it's very hard because it's an ongoing process, right? You have to sort of be very vigilant towards your boys, towards your brothers and husbands, whoever, men in the society. So, but it's hard enough telling your son that it's okay to be vulnerable, that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to be compassionate, right? You give the example of that particular example of, this hyper visibility and hyper invisibility of Black and brown bodies. When you point out that incident where the police pointed a gun at your son, thinking that he was an intruder in his own house. So it's very hard for you to tell him it's okay to be kind and polite, right? Of course, that's the right thing to do. But how would you explain embracing this vulnerability to a Dalit boy whose body and mind are controlled by caste oppression, where upper caste men and women bully the lower caste into submission, silence, and erasure, because not doing so could also mean their death? How do you then allow for a space for Dalit rage that is often articulated in terms of masculine, Dalit masculine, and sometimes feminine aggression? I'm not advocating for violence. I'm only trying to complicate the equation.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that question. And I had that too, as I wrote this is the Indian version of the book. I spoke to Dalit feminists, including, men and women. And I spoke to Dr. Sonora Jha, and he was talking about, because, the hierarchies of oppression, right? So as a male, what happens is, that a lot of Savarna or Brahmin, caste feminists say that, there's so much of aggression among Dalit men towards Dalit women. And he talks about how when you have this system of hierarchical oppression, the Dalit male becomes a mediator almost, let me keep my woman down, right? Because then because I am also being oppressed, which is why none of our, as I was saying earlier as well, we cannot be feminists. That kind of rage that we should feel, the outrage that we should feel, should also be toward Dalit oppression. Because if my Brahmin man is beating the Dalit man, right? He's already practiced on me, or if he's capable of that kind of violence, that violence will bounce back on me. And so I'm not doing it just out of self-interest as a Brahmin woman. But once I've noticed it, what is the state of my son or my man, where that innocence that comes from being vulnerable they're being robbed of it, right? If I teach my son, and he says this, that if you let your young child beat up a child of another lower caste and call him Bangi or whatever, you're letting your child become less innocent. You're taking away your own child's innocence. If you beat your servants or abuse your servants in front of, your boy, you are taking away their innocence, right? So, and their way of feeling joy and feeling safe in the world, because it's unsafe men that like Derek Chauvin or the horrible violent men in India that perpetrate violence because they feel vulnerable, but they don't know how to act or to show that they're vulnerable. So of course, when I am scared to teach my boy to be vulnerable because he's a brown-skinned man and I'm scared for him, but I cannot teach him to be violent because that's going to, or tell him that, okay, in this kind of a situation, you must, kill before you are killed. I can just pray that there are fewer of those situations. And in order to pray, whether you're praying to a God or you whatever you're praying to, you have to work towards that, right? If I am working toward making the world safer, I'm hopefully lessening the possibility that my son or someone's Dalit son in India or in the Silicon Valley is facing either institutional or physical violence.
Yeah, I was actually also reminded of what Arundhati Roy mentioned in the context of hunger strike. She said, you can't go on a hunger strike when you're suffering, when you're undergoing famine, when you're hungry, when you have no food. So when I'm talking about this Dalit rage, I was actually talking about it in the context of this political rage against the system, not this internalized rage which then gets articulated on the women. But that's a longer conversation to have. So Gauri Shingarpur says that she's very grateful and thankful to see, as a result of a lot of activism that has been happening in various organizations and businesses and educational institutions, change is happening. Women and minorities are being, championed. But at the same time, she's actually seen people trying to game the system. And here she'd like to quote, and I'm quoting her: "Look for a girl or a black, brown, gay kid to be on your team. The judges always favor that." Point, yeah, your comments?
Are we talking about things like reservations and affirmative action?
Yeah, I think that's what probably she refers to. No, but not just that, but also, like being privileged in a particular social setting, choose a black body, choose a brown body, to it helps to sort of, jump the line, for example.
Right.
Get picked.
Right. The jumping the line thing is like, about reservations and things, which is a very different conversation. Yeah. But the tokenism, I hope she's referring to tokenism, right? Where which is problematic because as we've seen with I wrote an op-ed in Crosscut a few months ago about the 3 women and BIPOC leaders in Seattle, like Mayor Jenny Durkin and the superintendent of schools and the police chief Carmen Best, that sure, these are women and these are BIPOC people, but are they upholding the values or anti-racist values and anti-racist ideology or anti-racist work, or are they also buying into the system and getting co-opted into that system of racism, sexism, etc.? And the problem is that they are, and that Jenny Durkin has a terrible record during the protests in the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. So yes, these women should not be representing us. Yes, these are not victories for. So I'm very much against the tokenism with which we appoint certain people and then co-opt them, right? And at the same time, I do understand if you're not changing the system, then these people are not going to succeed. And so, you're setting BIPOC people as well as women and, all the intersections, you're setting them up for failure because you're not talking about systemic change. You're not talking about defunding the police, but you're teaching, you're bringing them into a system that's going to do the same kind of policing. So what does it matter whether you're a white woman that's oppressing them or a brown woman that's oppressing them, right? So that kind of gaming the system or the tokenism is a big problem. At the same time, so you have to be vigilant. Like, you can't have one thing and just close your eyes and say, check, 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 we did this. At the same time, I don't like that as an argument to not dismantle systems that keep people behind, right? Saying, oh, this person's only going to get ahead because they are brown skinned. If they are qualified and if they are, dismantle the structures that keep them from finding their rightful place. So for instance, Joe Biden should not be running for the second time. I hope Kamala Harris runs for the second time. She was qualified this very time and she was not picked as the candidate. What business does Joe Biden have to run in 2024? And I know that people have probably logged off right now from our conversation, but we have to talk about these things. If we're going to keep having doddering old white men taking the same positions over and over, then, it's not just tokenism. We need to have, people take their rightful space. Yeah.
So quite clearly, given your very uncompromising political positionality, which you have always chosen over your marital stability, right? Would it be fair for me to ask you this question, whether your ex-husband, Alec, in the book, whether he saw you as this exotic trophy wife who he thought was smart, but not that smart, articulate, but only so much, and who didn't ask too many questions. Would that be fair?
No, actually, it would be the exact opposite.
Okay.
Those may have been traits that my first husband liked about me, but Alec, in fact, I have not seen a man respect me and my life as much as he did. And he knew that I was smarter than him. We had this joke very early in our relationship where he said, race does not matter to me. I think of you and me as equal. And I said, well, I don't think of you and me as equal because you have an undergraduate degree and I have a PhD, right? And not to be elitist, but to say, to sort of use it as a joke. I mean, I don't think people with lesser education are less than in any way, but it was particular to him. And we joked about it, and he knew I was smarter than him in many ways, and he absolutely loved that. And so he that's what he was drawn to, and that is why I was drawn to him, because in my first marriage I just felt like, Rajat, my first husband, would say, you're my diamond in the rough, but I was never really like the fully shining diamond, and so when I was the fully shining diamond and I had a PhD and I had a tenure track position and I was brilliant, my second husband was drawn to that and embraced that. And I did not treat me as the exotic other. And that is why I was drawn to him. I felt like exoticized, in fact, by more leftist men and put down many times by other South Asian friends' husbands. And I think the Indian male has to reckon with that kind of insecurity more than, and I'm not doing a broad brush thing here. We have problematic masculinity in every culture and every skin color. But I also want to turn that around and say that often we have this kind of notion that a white man would only marry a brown woman because she would be seen as the exotic, or because the Asian woman is demure and that's why, and I find that problematic too, because I feel like why is it so hard to believe that a white man would actually be dazzled by someone's brilliance and someone's power, and so those were the things that attracted me, because he knew how to get out of my way. He knew how to empower me and stay out of the photograph when I was being photographed, right? That it's not, he doesn't have to come in and establish like I am the man, attached to this woman. The things that I could not tolerate and why I walked away was because of his stand on guns and racism. And of course, a lot of these things are linked, but it became intolerable for me and I walked away from that. But the reasons I was drawn to him were because I was not seen as the exotic other or less than in any way.
Okay. I would like to talk a little bit more about this, but we are really running out of time. Maybe I can, I don't think we have any more questions other than, oh yeah, we have a few. Basuli, she says, I admit that I've not read your book and I don't have a son. However, I deal with men both in my professional and personal life who were not raised by feminist mothers. So these men I'm talking about are embodiments of gentle masculinity and vulnerability. I don't know what a question is. I'm sorry, Basuli, you've posted 4 points. Okay, I'm not in a situation to confront them openly, and the best I can do is give them the silent treatment. But I think that the message is not percolating to them. What social strategies would you suggest to women like me who get irritated by these contradictions in the best of men?
So I think we didn't catch the part of what the contradiction was, that they are gentle and vulnerable, but something happened, right? Something.
Okay, so these men that I'm talking about are embodiments of gentle masculinity and vulnerability, but they come with terrible social skills when it comes to who they include in social situations. So what social strategies would you suggest to women like me who get irritated by these contradictions in the best of men?
Well, tell them that you're irritated, right? Why do we don't have to walk on eggshells around the best of men, because clearly they're not the best of men. You can expect better from the best of men. And if they are gentle and vulnerable, often they will be open to this kind of feedback and say, hey, could you try and be more inclusive? And here's what it looks like, right? So I think in the same, we tend to sidestep or walk on eggshells because we are still assuming that they can't do better. And I think that that's unfair to them in many ways. So if they are good men, we can tap into that part of it, and they may surprise you. So I would say just voice it. And if they don't hear you, then they were not the gentle and vulnerable men that you thought they were.
Absolutely. Tula Goenka would like to congratulate you on your book, and she's really looking forward to reading it. So most of us might have missed the boat of intentionally raising our boys as feminists. What would you say to a mother who has never talked feminism to her son, never shared anything about her sex life or sexual abuse to her son, because this is what you advocate as well? It's a huge leap to make. What would you tell them?
I would say that it can start at any point. You know, my father, for instance, I feel like, you know, he was a feminist in some ways. Like, he wanted to raise his daughters to be strong and career driven and not think of marriage as their ultimate, you know, way out of anything. And even to say, you know, when he said to me, you know, marriage is for small people, marriage may not be for you, right? For an Indian father to do that, that was pretty remarkable. But he was also violent, and he was also a problematic man. And you know, but now we have a very different relationship where he has apologized and he's not violent. And of course, that could be a, you know, factor of age, but he has apologized and he's seen his violence and he's talked about it. And he says that he's ended up lonely, you know, estranged from his children because of that. And it's his biggest regret in his life, right? And so I am able to push him to be a better role model as a grandfather for my son. And so I think if he in his 70s is capable of change and of remorse and regret, then definitely our sons who may be in their 20s or 30s are, you know, it's never too late to start having these conversations. And there are, in fact, opportunities that are even better to have, you know, the conversations for opportunities for conversations with adult sons that are even better than when they are younger. So I would say it's never too late, you know.
Mm-hmm. Your book is honestly a very, very frank articulation of very personal, you know, experiences and instances in your life and in the life of your son. Did you seek permission from him?
Yes. So I told him quite early, you know, when I would write these essays and I would interview him for the essays, he would be fine, but, you know, he was busy with his life and he wasn't reading them necessarily. So when I started to write this book, before I signed the contract, I said, hey, this is not more important to me than our relationship. So I will not do this book if you are uncomfortable. He said, I am uncomfortable, but I want you to do this book. Right. And he said, yeah. And so he was very frank. He's a very private person, and he's he's introverted, and he doesn't like the performative aspect of feminist. So he doesn't want to be seen like, oh, let's see, you're the feminist son, right? So I've changed his name in the book, and I promised to protect his privacy to the best of my ability. I did not, you know, publish any photograph of him as the feminist son, and I've not asked him to be part of any of my events or anything. So he's been very supportive, and, you know, he even helped me with some of the research in the book and introduced me to his friends whom I could interview, etc. And, you know, was very happy, but doesn't want to be part of the public aspect of the book. So, yeah. And
what about your family? Did you seek their permission?
Well, I told my father I was going to write about it, and I didn't want to seek their permission because I felt like, well, with my sister I did, because I really care about her, and she's been a feminist. And I said, I will change your name, give me a nice name that you like, right? And so she chose a name. And the same with my stepdaughter. I said, you know, give me a name that my former stepdaughter, and I said, give me a name that you like. And I think that was a fun thing. And, you know, and I got their permission to do that. And the oppressors in my family, hell no, I'm not going to take their permission. They didn't take their permission when they rained blows on my body or emotionally abused me, and they do not deserve permission.
Mm-hmm. Right. I have one more question, and we'll end with that. Most diasporic narratives paint the originary home as an idealized space, a place of longing and return, at least for the first generation immigrants, for example, in The Namesake. You, on the other hand, chose to voluntarily exile yourself to the United States and have embraced this other side as home. Talk about that.
Yeah, I love this question, Alka, and I'm glad you're asking it. I mean, I've loved a lot of your questions, but this one especially because I think a lot of our narratives, whether published in fiction or spoken of at parties, are about this idealized home, right? Where that is not that's not always the truth, right? Especially for women, we've seen the oppression. There's a reason a lot of us don't want our daughters, for instance. I've heard from friends saying, "Oh God, I don't like to take my daughters back home because they have to endure this and that." But when we come back here, we sing the glories, right? Part of that is, of course, we've been colonized. We don't want to tell white people our stories and wash our dirty linen in public and have this Orientalist kind of view upon our people. But we are also not blowing the whistle on patriarchy, and we're not, so we keep talking about that world as this beautiful thing. And oh my God, I went and I bought my saris and my mother gave me these beautiful things. I've played that game too until it just became too intolerable. But on the other hand, when I talk about this space, right, I'm not talking about mainstream America, because mainstream America is full of patriarchal nonsense, and it's not a place of comfort especially for people of color, right, or for women too. I'm talking about the particular space that I have been able to make here, right? The world that I've made. So I was saying this to someone else the other day, that the same people that attended my second marriage, when my marriage failed and I bought this condo and had a housewarming party, the exact same people were here, right? I didn't lose any friends. You would think, you think, oh, twice divorced, people will be ostracized, or people will leave. No one left. And that's the thing, where it could be whether you're creating it in India or you're creating it in Singapore or you're creating it in Nigeria, it's possible to create that kind of space that you call home, that in which you can live by your values with your chosen family, right? And no one will leave because they were there for the part that is most authentically you, right? And I am not my most authentic self when I go back to India. I feel like I love it, and it's so sad. And I want to develop a different relationship with my own country, because on my own terms, and enjoy my country on those terms, right? Being able to go back and feel happy and dance in the streets, maybe. I long for that, but I don't necessarily get that as the woman that broke rules, and there's some kind of scrutiny. When I go back in terms of work, or in terms of having written a book or something for a book festival or something, it's beautiful and joyous, but I can see the inequities around me as well for other people.
So you mentioned in your book, well, thanks very much for pointing it out and so, articulating it so beautifully. You mentioned in your book that everyone has to find their own village, like you went in search of your village. And I'm reminded of what Chandra Talpade Mohanty says, forming a family is a political act. It's a political act. You have to find your community, regardless of, your gender, your sexuality, your race, ethnicity. So it's a political community that you form, a place where you're accepted for who you are.
Yes, absolutely. It's a political community, and it bends and stretches, right? So I think I've been able to wipe out all the really conservative elements from my life, and dance in this echo chamber or whatever. But the closest friends are those that, where it is an ideological, intellectual, and loving connection, right? Where it's someone with whom I can be my authentic self. And so, yeah, it's a political act. It's and I wish that for everyone. And I'm not saying that it's not possible within your home country or, within your traditional circles, but but I think we need to call out the elements that don't serve that, because they're not serving our kids anyway.
No, no. So, well, with that, I would like to thank you very much. And thank you not only for talking with me, but thank you for writing that book. Thank you for showing the way of the ways in which, we can create this community through an intentional act of political solidarity across all kinds of borders and boundaries, and feel completely ourselves, feel the complete us, and be the complete us.
Thank you, Alka, and thank you for reflecting that and for being part of my community and my feminist village here in Seattle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye.